All right, welcome back, everyone. So I'm going to jump into our next module here. We're going to be looking at immersion, which is the next movement in the contextual intelligence framework. So we'll be looking at semiotics and placefulness and concepts like that. Remember, the mind of Christ is kind of our biblical theological grounding for this, but where each one of these you can think of them as a movement in the contextual intelligence framework. So last time we looked at unlearning, cleansing the gates of behavior, perceptions, consciously choosing to change up behavior, thinking. And now the next movement is we literally immerse ourselves in the context, immerse ourselves in the community, immerse ourselves in the text, whatever you fill in the blank, but we really immerse and become one with and go into the context itself to do that sensing and perceiving activity from within. So, this is the theological principle of incarnation. And where a lot of ministry goes wrong and has gone wrong for about 2,000 years is to not be incarnational, to not immerse in, live in, and be vulnerable within a community, a context. So the second move is really about vulnerability. And if you connect it back to Jesus, right? So he remains sinless, but he descends into the human condition that is good and beautiful and true. Human beings are made in the image of God in a good world by a good God. There's also fragmentation in the world. There's also the reality of sin and disease and natural disaster and all the kind of like when sin, like a stone hits the pond water, it ripples out across the whole cosmos, and we live in that space. And currently, the creation is kind of travailing, wailing, getting ready to give birth to a new creation. But Jesus comes right into, immerses into that situation, takes a risk, becomes vulnerable, empties himself, right? So the incarnation, God coming in human flesh, is a missional and a passional endeavor. God, in God's love and God's compassion, moves right in to our world. So while the kings of the world oppress and take captive innocence, their self-seeking agendas, Jesus comes in selfless love and ultimate humiliation through the crucifixion. So God putting on flesh, the Word becoming flesh, the universal one enters into particularity, and Jesus brings healing to the cosmos, not by manipulating it from the outside or from an ivory tower, but through entering in fully, living the cruciform life in the middle of it. So, ultimate true contextualization. The immersion in the contextual intelligence framework is grounded in Jesus' own self-emptying incarnation. It's about us becoming flesh in our community, about us putting a little of wherever we are in the world and becoming of that and with that and in that. And immersion requires a posture of vulnerability. Jesus becomes dependent on his human parents and community like any other infant child, right? So when a baby's born, they have one, defense mechanism to be carried in the womb of compassion by a loving community, and to be cared for, nurtured, fed. And the one defense mechanism is like cry, right? Food, change me. So Jesus goes all the way into that, and he instructs his disciples to adopt really the same kind of immersive approach. So Luke 10, 1 through 9 is a big text for the Fresh Expressions movement and kind of our framework, going out teams of two, immersing ourselves in local communities, traveling light, leaving our stuff behind, right? Not taking extra purses, bags, sandals, but going out, trusting God, finding the persons of peace. So we are vulnerable. We are dependent on the hospitality of others. We are the guests, not the hosts. And so to immerse ourselves is to locate the person of peace, to be dependent on their hospitality, and their caregiving and their love. So we are not the ones with the resources and the things that they need, but there's a mutuality in this, right? And we are welcome and provided by those persons of peace. So, in the North American context, Jesus' very life and death provide a model for our mission. His incarnation is the form of our mission. I like to talk a lot about the passional church and passional theology, which is theology centered in the compassion of God. That one of the greatest indicators of the nature of God and the being of God is the suffering of God and the pain of God. And we have a God who's not removed from our suffering and pain, but enters into it and experiences it, and experiences at every level the pain of the cross and the human experience. And so that cross-shaped way should guide how we go about life and mission. And we as the church, as the body of Christ, are an extension or an embodiment of the flesh and blood of Jesus that we proclaim. We become a channel of God's grace and love in the world, or we should. So, immersion is the action of immersing someone or something in a context. We must fully immerse ourselves in our community in risky, vulnerable, incarnational ways. There's a sociologist, Christine Stasch, who's done a lot of research on the difference between an open system and a closed system. And an open system is actually dependent on the environment for its vitality. An open system has permeable boundaries and things move in and out of it. So it's situated in its environment and it's tethered to and survives within, and there's an income going, inflow and an outflow within that kind of a system. A closed system can function as a solitary environment with no input or inflow or outflow from the environment. So closed social systems, think of like a gated community where you're either in or you're out, and you have everything you need in a self-contained little gated community to like survive forever, right? So actually, a lot of churches can function as closed systems, right? Where you just kind of drop a church on the corner and do the franchise McDonaldized church. So in a closed system, you maybe don't need the community. You have enough money to keep going. You have all the stuff you need in terms of just being a spiritual community. You got maybe funding for at least in your lifetime, and so you're really not that concerned about the environment. And it becomes more of like the pastor, spiritual butler, and you're kind of caring for the closed system. A missional church, a contextually intelligent church, is connected and engaged in the environment, an open system. So closed systems in particular, um, context, they do not need the context to function. Their environments don't take into consideration the system when they act, when they behave. Um, uh, the Christendom ideal is kind of on this closed system level. So it's a church was a church, regardless of whatever a church looked like, it acted like a church. You could basically airlift a church to any context, like drop it, and it would be church, right? And it would look very much the same and whatnot. In comparison, an open system not only takes the context into consideration, but it depends on its environment for input and resources. Therefore, the open system exists for the sake of the context, with the context, and in the context. Um, so the definition of pastoral practice of immersion in context and showing awareness of the context through listening, dialogue with, and involvement in the local community. Think about if you've ever been on a mission trip, for example. And many of us who've been on mission trips and regularly do that, a lot of times you'll hear the same testimony, right? We come back, I went to do this or serve or whatever. But what really changed was me. Like I had this experience through this immersion that changed how I think, how I view American society, those kind of things. So think about our community in that way and the pastoral responsibility, the minister responsibility. is not just for a congregation, but for a community. For instance, for those of us that are Methodists, we have this thing like the world is our parish, right? That we're not just sent to serve a congregation, but a charge, and a charge is part of a parish, and the parish is an area, a region, a city, a rural space, whatever. Adopters of that approach show competency in the ability to interpret text and context with insight. So we need to have an open system where we're able to interpret and um, uh, um, understand what's going on and have a flow from the community in and the out of the congregation into the community and vice versa. So if you were to assess your congregation or your church plant today, just thinking about this, would you say that it's an open system or a closed system? Think about that. It might help you to actually reflect on that a little bit. Um, you could even, for those of you that are watching live, you could post it in the comments or later on as you watch. Um, I want to kind of wrestle with this concept of placefulness. There's a book called How to Do Nothing, which I highly recommend to anybody, but Jenny Odell talks about placefulness is a sensitivity and responsibility to the historical, what happened here. Remember, we talked about the tell and the layers of story and meaning and community, and the ecological factors like who and what lives here or has lived here. So bioregionalism is this concept that involves the interrelation of human activity with ecological and geological features as for a way that we should think about place. So in the network society where we opened right in the first lecture, there's a concept called deterritorialization. And it's where in the flows of media and digital technology and the way the network society is structured, you lose contact with place, or you can be literally in your place, but on a screen or in a VR headset. And so you're physically in your place, but not mentally, emotionally, or any other way in your place because you're really in this portal to this whole other world. And one of the dangers of that is that we've lost a commitment to our place and the bundle of relationships that make up a place and the ecosystem of a place. So there's a Edward Wilson, this American biologist. He wrote about, he was one of the fathers of this kind of biodiversity kind of thinking. He describes biophilia and that it's a drive in human beings to love our place, to be together with all living species. We have this baked in innate kind of instinct to really care about our place and be connected to it and to be a placeful kind of a species. Um, so biophilia, placefulness. Places are not just merely a physical space holder, is what I'm getting at here. They're living, breathing ecosystems. Places have a distinct web of relationships. Places are made of particular flowers, birds, insects, water sources. Human beings, when they're part of a context, they're made up of particular people, and that means particular customs and languages and cultures and meaning systems. Thus, semiotics, why it's such an important part of contextual intelligence. And we'll see how Jesus kind of taught people to attend to their place. The value of immersion, there's a lot out there in design thinking, if you will. And that's people-centered, kind of immersive approach to solving problems, to creating products, to forming community, fill in the blank. But we have these biases. We can be kind of rooted in the status quo, and we can create these little closed systems in our thinking and our policies and our organizations. And that often can block imagination and innovation. And so design thinking approach is people-centered, says get out in the community, create focus groups, take in the data, right? Use qualitative methods, get group surveys, data, current behaviors. You can draw a lot from the context and then draw inferences about the context. In this case, we're talking about, customers and business world, but what are the needs that people are articulating? What's the data kind of reflecting? What are the lenses of their own biases? So these methods can uncover the needs people have not expressed, and they can discover new kind of things. And through immersion, actually innovation can take place. We can identify the hidden needs and the lived experience. So learning takes place when we deeply immerse ourselves in the perspective of others, co-creating with stakeholders, designing experiments, kind of iterating. One of the things in this module that could be helpful is a people map exercise. So immersing yourself in the community, drawing out what does your community look like? Draw out the social system. What's your home base? What are the potential first, second, third places? That language is Ray Oldenburg's language of sociologists who said first place is your home, second place work, could be your school as well. Third place being those common neutral territories, places, spaces, coffee shops, parks, dog parks, EV charging stations, taverns, tattoo parlors, wherever. Think about your place. Map out where are places that your team goes frequently that you could literally immerse yourself in. Do you have a person of peace in those places? Like, do you know the owner of the coffee shop or a tattoo artist who's inviting you into their space, right? Or think about your community and who are the persons of peace that open the relationships or open those spaces. And then prayerfully decide which of those possibilities has the most potential. You got to pick one, right? So what would the next logical step be? Use all of these kind of tools as you're creating your situational awareness kind of exercise. And then maybe pick one place where you're going to go. Mind map everything about that place, right? So who goes there, what time, what's the temperature, what do the people do in the space, what's the terroir, what's it smell like, sound like, feel like, use all of your senses. Then connect some of those ideas to think about a potential fresh expression or ministry or outreach that's based in that place, like a contextual form of church that comes out of the immersion experience, out of the prayerful kind of inhabiting that space. The last thing I want to say here is, a lot of people, this is what they see when they look at the church. We put a sign out front, we say all are welcome, but a lot of churches function as a closed system it's like a maze for an outsider to even get in or understand the language, the social conventions, and all of that. And we could put a sign out in front of our church and say, all are welcome, right? But what we're really communicating is some are welcome, because even that sign communicates something about our posture, right? What we're really communicating is some are welcome who can come at this time, at this place, that sing this music, that speak this language, that know this liturgy that we've already determined before you got here, that know when to stand, when to say this, when to pray that, right? That understand the words that we use. We're saying some are welcome who can come at this time, that place. Um, and the only way the church will become more accessible is if it becomes more contextual and it spills out of the maze and it springs up in every nook and cranny of life as teams of contextually intelligent followers go out sensing and perceiving and reading the signs and creating little pockets of community of Jesus. And in an epidemic of loneliness and isolation, this is so important and so essential because people are dying of loneliness every day. And we have this gift of community, communal life in Jesus that can heal, where we can be religamented, restored, brought back together in Christ and with one another. Wouldn't it be selfish of us to hold back the gift and lock it up in our stained glass windows and our closed systems? And so contextual intelligence is about releasing the priesthood of all believers to create those little pockets of contextual little forms of communal life in Jesus where people can be known and loved and find community and healing. All right, everybody. Thanks for being part of this. See you on the next module.